Okay, good evening. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Always interesting. So just before we begin, another word of prayer. It never hurts to pray more when we're opening the Bible and looking at God's word, right? All right, so bow your heads. Lord, please guide us as we open your word and we study how times and you have had your hand in it all. Please bless us and help us to get back here tomorrow safely so we can investigate more about your word. In your name we pray, amen. All right, so 15 minutes. I have to remind myself or I will forget, and then we'll be stuck here all night. So I'm setting my timer. When you see the sands dial run out, it's time for a break. And everybody can see over my head, right? Do I need to step to the side? Okay, so first of all, you'll notice that when you go into the fellowship hall that there are some lovely displays on the wall of museum pieces and replicas and fossils. And then next to those, on the bench covered by the black tablecloths, we have some free materials that, take whatever you will. As far as children's materials go, let's leave the children's materials for children that are attending after the program. Whatever's left, please feel free to look, but let's make sure that the little ones get their stuff before we go, saving stuff for additional children. When you are looking at biblical history, does a volcano come to your mind first thing? When you're looking at the Bible, do you see volcanoes anywhere in there? Word volcano is not in there, but volcanoes are important. Volcanoes are important. If I told you that there was a volcano getting ready to erupt, or that there was just a volcano, what are some things that you'd want to know? Where is it? Do you need to run? What's another question? Yeah, how long? When is it going to go off? How big? If it just bubbling, or are we going to have Mount St. Helens level here? We need. Yeah, which way the wind is going, because we need to know which direction to run. We also need to know if it's in the past, there's no reason to run because it's already happened. So we're going to be looking at the who, the what, the when, the where, the effects of the volcano. The volcano that I'm going to be referencing is Mount Tambora. Mount Tambora blew up in 1815. Now, this had lasting effects over the entire world because the next year there was so much dust and debris from the volcano that went off in the Philippines that it caused what was known as the year without summer. They were literally chiseling away ice on 4th of July from the water barrels in Jamestown, Virginia. Now, if you've ever been in Virginia in July, you will know that that is a major event because it is hot, it is humid. You would never think that there would be ice in the ice barrel, but they had to chisel away the ice and they had to light the fires in the church to get warm. This is how cold it was. Because of this year without summer, there was famine. There was we ended up with 3 new states because of it, because all of the people that had been sitting up in New England afraid to move didn't have a choice. They had to start leaving and going to new territories because there was not enough food to have everybody survive. So we actually ended up with 3 new states because of it. But it was a massive event that had lasting impacts. And one of the things, the reason I mentioned the volcano specifically tonight, is because we have a timeline for the events that happened. First, we had rumbles of the volcano getting ready to go off. Then there was a dry fog that went through. It affected the color of the sunsets. The sunsets were actually blue in some cases. The sound effects you could hear after the volcano went off thousands of miles away. And the mountain itself lost 5,000 feet of dirt, and it left a crater 4 miles wide. It is the biggest known volcanic eruption in history. And this will make a little bit more sense when we get to Noah's Ark and some of the environmental effects of the flood. We'll go back and we will reference this volcano tomorrow afternoon. So pay attention, you got a sneak preview of tomorrow with the volcano. But with this timeline, you notice it starts in 1812 and it goes all the way to 1817. So was this just a one and done event? Or did it occur in multiple stages over a series of time? occurred multiple stages over a series of time. This is kind of what, when we're looking at an event in the Bible, was Jonah just a one and done? Jonah is also mentioned not only in the book of Jonah, he's mentioned as having dealings in the Chronicles. So Jonah wasn't just a one and done. He was a prophet that they were very familiar with that was then sent on his mission. Most people don't realize that. He had other work to do besides go preach to Nineveh, but there's a timeline that we can follow. But when we're looking at this, why are we looking at timelines? What would be the purpose in looking at a biblical timeline?
Accuracy of the Bible.
Accuracy of the Bible. What else? See what happened. What else? Prophecies. Verifying they're true and then verifying ones that have yet to take place. When you are looking at timelines, is this trying to predict the end of the world? No. Placing events in the past is not setting a date for Christ's return. There's a very big difference between those. So people tend to run when you say, oh, let's look at the timelines. Let's see when events occurred. They run the other way. They're like, no, we're not predicting. We're not predicting. We're looking at the past to verify that the Bible is true. So we can do that in certain ways. One, we can put the books of the Bible in order. So this is a timeline of from the beginning all the way through to the Gospels. You see, Genesis covers 2,000 years of history. Genesis covers like the longest stretch of written history that we have. And then we have all of these other things are all grouped together in only a 1,000-year time span. 1,000 to 1,500-year time span. They're all grouped together, one on top of the other, occurring simultaneously, back and forth. So sometimes it gets a little difficult to keep track of what's going on where. When you're looking at like 1st and 2nd Chronicles, you've got to go back and you've got to look at 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel and 1 Kings and 2 Kings to align them and put them together and understand what's going on. And we have the split kingdoms. We have the kingdom of Judah, and we have the kingdom of what? Israel, and then we have them all together. So we have multiple kingdoms that we're looking at, and are those the only kingdoms mentioned in the Bible? No, who else is mentioned in the Bible? Babylon. Greece. Assyria. Rome, Mesopotamia. So we have all sorts of different cultures throughout the world. Do we think that the Bible's the only written record of these things? No. So we're not only looking at the Bible when we're looking at timelines, what else are we looking at? We're looking at history books. So here's some history books for you. King Herod the Great, otherwise known as Herod the Not So Great in my books. Historians, they say that King Herod died in March or April of 4 BC. We know from prophecy that Christ was born in the fall of 4 BC. What's the issue here? Do you see the problem? What's the problem?
They had to flee to Egypt to avoid King Herod from killing Christ.
Yeah, and most historians put King Herod as dying months before Christ was born. And if you go with, this is if Christ died in 31 AD, which we know based on prophecy is what happened. He died in 31 AD. But another accepted date for Christ's death in many historical records is 33 AD. So this would put Christ's birth even further away from Herod's death. So where did historians get this date of March to April of 4 BC? They date it because they date it to an event that Josephus wrote about. Did Josephus use BC and AD? No, they didn't have that back in his day. They didn't develop that until I think it was like somewhere around the 500s, 400s, 500s, but it was way after the events. So they dated things to certain events, such as eclipses. So Josephus says that King Herod died near a lunar eclipse between New Year's and the Passover. Well, when you're looking in Jerusalem, there are 3 lunar eclipses that were visible during that time frame. historians automatically jump to the first one because then it would disprove that Christ ever existed. They like that date. They want to remove Christ from the Bible, or not from the Bible, from history books, say that it's not true, and this is why it couldn't possibly be true. So they all jumped on the first one, the March 13th, 4 BC date. However, there were two other eclipses. Only ones that it could possibly be was just January the 10th of 1 BC, or that same year at the very end of the year, December 29th of 1 BC. Most likely, it was actually the last one, December 29th of 1 BC, right before it switched from BC to AD. That is most likely the one. But that means that Christ was 3 years old, almost 3 years old before Herod died. But this is an example of why we can't necessarily rely on historians to give us an accurate date. We take the what and compare it. We take the Bible, compare it to what we have from history. Don't rely on the historical dates. Look at what they actually wrote. Because sometimes what they actually wrote is much different than what the historians have deemed it. Because they're just taking guesses many, many times. And that's actually coins from Herod. King Herod the Great, these are coins of his. And this is actually how we date, and we know that his sons were co-rulers with him. They co-ruled for 4 years with him. But you won't find, when you're looking at the coins, the Romans would not allow a son, even if he was co-ruling with him, would not allow him to put his name on the coin as ruler. They said, until your dad is gone, you may not put your name on a coin. We don't care what you put on the coin after he's gone. You could say that you've ruled for 15,000 years. We don't care. But you cannot put your name on a coin until he is gone. So when dad died, after co-ruling with his sons for 4 years, all of a sudden, we start seeing coins that say, oh, I've ruled for 4 years. Because they were now officially allowed to put their name on their coin, and they wanted to extend the length of their rule. Why would they want to do that? It would give them credibility. Seniority. Look, I've already been ruling for 4 years. You can't come along. You haven't ruled at all. I've got 4 years under my belt. So we see a bunch of coins in the year 4 for Herod's sons. We do not find them from beforehand. This proves that right around the turn of the century, from BC to AD, Herod actually died, which makes the December date more relevant than the January date. All right, Bible provides timeline, less than 6,000 years. So you'll have evolutionists, you have creationists, but there's a division between creationists. You have old world creationists and you have young earth creationists. Bible supports a young earth creationist theory. Bible says in 6 days God made it. The term day and night refers to a literal 24-hour period. That's why he used day and night and just not, hey, on the first day I made this. And we can find our timeline here. Now that gives us a general idea of what's going on in the Bible, right? We have Adam, the flood, Abraham, Exodus, Daniel, second coming eventually in the future. But this is a general timeline. Does this do us a whole lot of good? Could you really base a lot of information off of this timeline that we've got up here right now? Not really. It's a general outline. It doesn't give us many details. God said he told us the beginning from the end. So we should be able to find all of the data we need from the beginning to the end where? In the Bible. So the information's in there somewhere. We just have to go what for it? We have to go digging for it. So we're going to go digging in our Bible. All right. Jubilees. So this is a tradition. Sometimes you can look at traditions and be like, oh, that makes sense. Sometimes when it comes to traditions, you're like, oh, that makes absolutely no sense. But traditionally speaking, when Noah is told that the world has 120 years, the Jewish Pharisees and the rabbis took that and they said 120 jubilees. And then they multiplied 120 jubilees by 50 years, which is a jubilee is 50 years. And they came up with 6,000 years here on earth and 1,000 years in heaven, which tends to match what Revelation says, that the 1,000 years might be fulfilled in heaven. this would be that. This is where you get the idea behind cosmic week theory. It's based on the tradition that comes from the Jewish rabbis of taking those 120 years, multiplying it by 50 jubilees, and getting 6,000. But the Bible, we don't even need that to prove that the earth is less than 6,000 years old. We're looking at this. Nobody has lived to be 1,000 years. Agreed? But Bible says that we have Adam, Noah, Jared, Methuselah. All these people lived 900 years. Methuselah is the oldest at 969. Then we have Jared, 962. Noah, 950. Adam, 930. And actually, the book of Jubilees, it says that because each year is 1,000 years is as one day, we read this in Peter. Peter says 1,000 years is as a day. Book of Jubilees, which is traditions, you gotta weigh it. When you're reading the traditions, what do you gotta do? Read them, compare it with the Bible, because which one is going to be correct? The Bible. There's nothing wrong with looking at the traditional stuff as long as you are taking it worth a grain of salt and comparing what you're reading with the Bible and basing your beliefs on the Bible. But it says that he didn't complete that 1,000 years. He died the day that he ate the fruit, because in the day that you eat of it, you will die. Nobody's lived 1,000 years. They died within that day. So this is another hypothesis on dying that very day. Some people say sin entered the world that day, and therefore, theologically, people died the very day that they ate the fruit. This is another hypothesis for that. Just thought you might find that interesting based on the 6,000 years and 1,000 years in heaven. All right. Now, if we're going to research timelines, what are some questions to ask?
Starting point.
We need a starting point, but there's something you learn in English class. It's the W questions. What are the W questions? Yep. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. So, when we're looking at timelines, we're going to go through it. All right, who? Who created time? God. What marks the passage of time? Sun, the seasons. When did time begin?
Time began when the earth was created.
When the earth was created. When God came down and said, and the evening and the morning were the what day? First day. Time didn't begin once Adam sinned. They were already, God created time before Adam sinned. He created time on day number 4. On the next slide, we'll see. On day number 4, God gave them the way that they were to define time. Time did not begin when Adam sinned. Man's probation did not begin when Adam sinned. Man's probation began at creation. The tree of knowledge of good and evil was in that garden. Probation began. They had the tree. They did not sin that very first day, as far as we're aware, but they were on probation because the tree was present. So time began, day 1 of creation. All right, where do we see this in Scripture? Can we prove that from Scripture? Genesis chapter 1. All right, why is it important to know all this? It's the beginning of our history. If we don't know where we came from, how can we know what we're trying to achieve? We wouldn't have any purpose. We have to have a purpose. And how does knowing the past help prepare us for the future? Once we know our purpose, how does it help us get ready?
We make mistakes along the way to know what not to do and what we should do.
And it helps us study, helps us learn from other people's mistakes. So we don't have to make the same mistakes. We can say, oh, okay, that didn't work out too well. Maybe I'll just avoid snakes and talking in the trees. Okay? Let them be for signs and seasons. So the heavenly bodies, the celestial bodies, was what was to mark the passage of time. And God is the one that set that up. So that's the 4th day of creation, Genesis 1:14. Man did not create time. God created the week. That is why we do what? That's why we worship him and keep the Sabbath, because it's a memorial of what? Creation. Every week we're supposed to memorialize God who made creation. There we go. Trick question. All right, understanding the Bible helps us understand that the Bible is true. If we look at prophecy, we can say, hey, I know this is true because I can see this over here. I don't need somebody else to tell me. I don't have to, have it proven to me over and over again. I can see it for myself. John and Daniel are big on time prophecies. You can go through, you got the 2,300 days, the 1335, the 1,260, the 1,290, the times, the half, the times. You can really get into some math there. I'm not going to get into that math. We will get into some math, but not that particular math today. We can go through and use all of those times, and we can get all the way back to when the temple is destroyed. Just using prophecy, 2,611 years. All of that time prophecies, 2,611 years. We can get all the way back to when the temple is destroyed. Who destroyed the temple? Nebuchadnezzar. So if we have these, they're called concrete dates. They're firm dates. They're immovable dates. When you have an immovable date, what can you then do with it? Yeah, you can calculate your dates. All right, so when we're looking AD and BC, what do those mean? We use them all the time.
After death and before Christ.
Well, year of our Lord and before Christ. A lot of people use AD after death. They've actually changed this recently. If you see a Bible or a religious book that is not using these, that's using the modern one, you might as well throw it out. Because by using the new ones, you're removing Christ. You're actively saying, I want to remove Christ from history. Because the new ones are before the common era and the common era. So if you see somebody saying something, Babylon was destroyed, or, Babylon went in and destroyed Jerusalem in, 606 BCE. Well, I know not to read that person again because they're actively saying, I am choosing to ignore Christ. So that's my own little pet peeve. I mean, you can continue to read, see what they have to say. I'm not going to stop you. You are free to read whatever you like, but just beware that they're already telling you they don't believe Christ, or they believe him, but they're not willing to make a stand for him. They want to use the politically correct terms. All right, when we're looking at timelines, make sure that you're not making the same mistake a lot of people do. There is no year zero. There is absolutely no year zero. So when you're going this direction, when you're going forward from BC to AD, you add a year. When you're going backwards, you subtract a year. All right, timelines. Gospels. Now we get into the fun stuff. We've gotten all that other stuff out of the way. We're getting ready to get into the good stuff where you get to see the archaeology and how we're going to use this data to actually place and date some things. But look, we've already been here 15 minutes. So we're going to take a break, a 5-minute break. There's refreshments in the back. You can go look at some of the artifacts. I'll be back there to answer some of your questions. There's books on display. Feel free, go through, look, take what you need, and we will meet back here in about 5 minutes. Welcome back. All right. What are the Gospels about? The life of Jesus. So who would be our main character? Jesus. He should be the main character through the whole Bible. Oh, would help if I turn this on too. All right, life of Christ. Can we put the life of Christ in a timeline? Yeah, we can pinpoint Christ. We can pinpoint all the people that are named. There's Augustus Caesar, Tiberius Caesar. Nero is implied but not directly mentioned, but we know when all of these people lived, we have historic records of them, so their dates are very, very accurate. With exception of Tiberius, there's a little fluke where he actually started ruling a little bit before they typically say, which will affect John the Baptist, but we're not getting into that. But for general purposes, these dates are correct and accurate. All right, then we have the taxation. Do we have a record of this taxation? We have a record of the taxation where Mary and Joseph were forced to go to where? Bethlehem. All right. It said that a certain man was governor, Cyrenius, also known as Quirinius. We have a record of this man. He was governor not once, but he was governor twice, which was kind of unusual, and people loved him. Other people in their tombstones mention this guy. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm writing a tombstone for a loved one, I'm not going to mention somebody that distantly connected to them. But he was so well liked that they were naming him in the tombstones of other people that were under his command. All right, this is a tombstone inscription. This is what I was saying. The tombstone inscription where they're actually going through and saying that he was governor twice, and he's listed on these tombstones as a prefect. Herod the Great, we know where his palace was. We have his dates. We know where his palace was. We also know who his children were. His children are listed. This is the guy, Archelaus. That's the guy that took over ruling when he died, that they were like, oh, he's really, really bad. We don't want to go back there. Then we have Philip and Antipas and Herodias and Salome. We have all of these people. They are very, very well documented in history. We also have Herod the Great's casket or sarcophagus. So you can see where it's been shattered. So this is when you're looking at something in a museum. They've taken all the shattered pieces and they've built a reconstruction of it. And they built a form. They put the pieces on the form where they think they were originally. And then they went through and they built a model fully constructed to show what it would have looked like. But in addition to his sarcophagus, we also have Herod Antipas's palace. This is the throne chair. This is where he would have been sitting when the girl danced and asked for John the Baptist's head. She would have been dancing on that floor, right in front of her. We actually have the floor. They used to say that Pontius Pilate did not exist. We have no record of him, and he was never governor of Judea. Guess what we found? We found a signet ring and an inscription that proves this. So we didn't find just one document that said, hey, he's governor and he ruled Judea. We have two documents that said that he was governor and that he ruled Judea and the approximate time frame in which he did so. We have Caiaphas's bone box. So you know what a bone box is? An ossuary box? So an ossuary box is where they would take a body, and they were running out of areas to put the bodies sometimes. Sometimes they just wanted to be nice and fancy. So they would prep the body, let the body decay, and after the body had decayed enough that it was just bones, they would then take the bones, prepare the bones, and place them in this box. And they would put them on the shelf, and you would have shelves within the tombs of the different individuals, and they would write their names on them. That's Caiaphas's.
So that's how they took the bones back to the other places.
Yes.
Oh, okay, that makes sense now.
Yes. So they didn't burn the bodies, they just let the body decay naturally, and then they would take the bones and place them in these boxes. We also have Caiaphas's daughter's bone box. That actually, her bone box tells us what order of the priesthood that he was from. So we know that John the Baptist's father was from the order of Abijah. Nobody knew what order Caiaphas was from until they found his daughter's bone box, and it tells the lineage on the bone box. And we know that I think it was the 23rd order, it's like the 23rd or the 24th order of priests, which means we also know that when in previous times, every time that you get through a certain order, they would start at Passover, and in their specific orders that each week they would serve a week in the temple. So knowing his order, we can actually go back to before he was the high priest to when he was just a regular priest, and we know which weeks out of the year he was actually in Jerusalem serving as high priest. We can do the same thing with John the Baptist's father, which means we know exactly when John the Baptist was conceived. After we figure out when John the Baptist was conceived, we can actually then go through and we can figure out when Jesus was conceived. Any ideas on when Jesus was conceived? Christmas. What we call Christmas today. The week between Christmas and New Year's is the approximate time frame of when Jesus was conceived, which means that we also know that he was born approximately in September or October of 4 BC, which is exactly at an 8-day feast called the Feast of Tabernacles, where it says, "Come, let me dwell amongst you." And then so he would have been born probably at the beginning of the Feast of Tabernacles, and then on the 8th day he would have been presented at the temple, which was the end of the Feast of Tabernacles. Can we prove that?
What month was that?
So September/October would have been the time frame when he was born, and there is a feast specifically within that time frame called the Feast of Tabernacles that was celebrated for years. We know that all of the holy feasts all pointed to Jesus. So there could have been dual fulfillment of those. There could still be an additional fulfillment, but I just find it really interesting that during the time frame when we know he was born, there's a feast called the Feast of Tabernacles, and he said, "Come, let me tabernacle among you," or "Come, let me dwell among you." Very interesting. But there's also geologic evidence of Christ. Geologic evidence of Christ. What do we know of that happened at the crucifixion? Earthquake. Major earthquakes. Several of them, in fact. Because one was the day that he died, and another one was when?
Resurrection.
At the resurrection. So we have at least 2 major earthquakes. When they're looking at the geologic layers in Jerusalem, and they're looking through, like, okay, event here, event here, event here, they pinpoint major geological events, aka earthquake, occurred in 31 AD. And then they say plus or minus 5 years because they want to get to that 33 AD date.
Yeah.
So then they say, okay, plus or minus 5 years. But if you're actually counting, going through, they're saying 31 AD, this event happened. So we have geologic proof that Christ is 31 AD. So if Christ, we verified 31 AD, over and over and over again, we have verified the life of Christ. 31 AD for his death. Where do we go from there? Well, if we know when he died, we can go back, we can follow that 70 weeks of Daniel. We can go back, we know when it started. It started when? 457 BC. This is very important. They've tried to change this date in a lot of the modern textbooks and a lot of the modern religious books. They've changed this date so that it doesn't have any significance whatsoever. 457, they've changed it to 456. I saw one book where they changed it to 455, trying to adjust the dates, but when you start doing that, prophecy starts falling apart, and the Bible has the prophecies become inaccurate. Is the Bible inaccurate? No, the Bible is accurate. So this is an unmovable date. This is unchangeable. 31 AD, 457 AD, or BC. Yeah, BC. Thank you. Artaxerxes the First. He is the stepson of Queen Esther. So when it says in Ezra, and is it Ezra or Nehemiah? It might be Nehemiah where it says the queen by his side. I've always wondered, was the queen by his side actually the queen mother and Esther? Because when we go back and look, so this guy, his nickname was long-handed because his right hand was longer than his left hand. And we can see, look how he's holding his hand in this relief carving. He's holding it out. I don't know if he's proud of it or that's just, hey, look, this is my name because my hand is so much longer. This is his tomb. We have his tomb, his father's tomb, his grandfather's tomb. He was only 20 years old when he began to rule. He was 20 years old. When Vashti got kicked out from being queen, one of the reasons that they suspect that she didn't want to go and exhibit before all these men was she had just had a baby. That baby that she had just had was this little boy who grew up to be the king, who in the 7th year of his rule said, go, restore Jerusalem, rebuild Jerusalem, and while you're at it, enforce your laws. What would have impacted him to say, go ahead and enforce your laws? Esther, and who else? Yes. His father, what happened to his father?
Wasn't he killed in Greece?
No. He was going, the war, or the reason they were having the party in the book of Esther is they were actually preparing to go to Greece to fight, and this was the meeting of the generals to determine what they were going to do. This was their final battle plan, and they knew that there was a good chance that a lot of them wouldn't come back. So they were partying it to the hilt. That's probably why they were so drunk. Then they go, and they come back, they lost, and they lost badly. This is when Haman comes in and says, hey, your advisors, I'm maybe not so smart. And this is probably when Haman weasels his way in and becomes this big guy in the kingdom there. But during this time, Esther becomes queen, and the king's chamberlains decide to do what? They were going to kill him. His two most trusted people that took care of him, made sure that he was safe while he was sleeping, were going to kill him in his sleep. At Mordecai, he heard the plan, figured it out, went and told, and that's how we actually ended up with this event that then the king is like, oh, I can't sleep. Esther's, what is she going to ask for? What's going on here? And here's the story. This all happens, and I think I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So we have the 457 BC going on. This is the decree to go forth. We have when Ezra leaves, from when the king issues the decree to when the decree was actually enforced, was 5 months. So if you're looking at the Great Disappointment, this is why they originally said the spring date, and then moved it to a fall date, if you're wondering the backstory behind that. So Esther's queen becomes queen in 478 AD, or BC, 478 BC. And when we're doing BC dates, we're working our way backwards. So we know 457 BC. We know that was in the 7th year of Artaxerxes I. We know that his father, Xerxes, ruled for 20 years. After, this was in the 12th into the 13th year of the king. 7 years after the events of Esther, he ends up being killed by the chamberlains, a different set of chamberlains. So when his son then goes to become king, the older 2 boys were fighting. They ended up being killed. There was a lot of backstabbing going on within the palace. The son, Artaxerxes I, surrounds himself with people he knows to be trustworthy, under the influence that he had from Esther and Mordecai. So the king had maybe 7 full years. Then there's a year of going back and forth and fighting. Then Artaxerxes becomes king, and then that starts the countdown to when the 7th year of his rule, when he goes there. So we know that none of these dates are movable. We know that Haman's plot took place in 473. We know Esther was crowned queen in 478. We know when Xerxes began. We know when his father began. You can go through and you can calculate each one, the dates, if you have an original copy. So if you have a copy of Daniel and the Revelation, Okay? A lot of people will read the new version from the 1940s. They redid it. Wrong. There's a lot of information that they changed. Uriah Smith, the man who wrote the book, died in 1904. In the 1940s, they went through, and ever since then, they've actually taken a lot of the writings that he did. They've removed entire chunks of data and rewritten it to match the modern theories. So if you have the opportunity to get an original copy of the Daniel and the Revelation, and it will tell you the exact lengths of time based on all of the old history books that everybody was using. And these history books were not just religious people. These history books were of learned men that didn't even believe in God. But everybody agreed to how long these ancient kings ruled because they're looking at the tablets that we have. And the kings in these tablets are saying, I ruled X amount of years, I ruled this length of time, and they have all of those dates. And then they started putting them in, and we can get all the way back. And guess what? It aligns up with what we know from the Bible. So we can get all the way back to 606 BC, which is when Nebuchadnezzar comes in. So Ahasuerus, otherwise known as Xerxes I, we have a tablet that at the beginning of Esther, it mentions a list of advisors to the king. When we are looking in the Bible at these lists of advisors, this tablet actually matches the list of advisors that we have from the Persian archaeology. We don't have a lot of Persian archaeology, but that we do have matches this. And this is actually relief carvings of what Esther's husband looked like. So if you're ever wondering to put a face to the name, voila. All right, Cyrus the Great. So we go back a couple kings. Cyrus the Great, this cylinder talks about Cyrus releasing the Israelites and saying, go, be free, I set you free. Why did he do this? It was prophesied in the book of Isaiah 100 years before Cyrus was even born, and it named him not once, but at least twice. Now, even though Cyrus was a pagan king still took the word of God very seriously. So when he is shown, hey, you've been prophesied about, he listened. He said, please, go, be free. So we know when this event occurred. We have the records for this event taking place. We can take it back to a guy called Xerxes II, otherwise in the Bible known as Darius the Great. We have his record. There's a guy called Nabonidus. I've got his cylinder in the back room there. It's a little cylinder with in front of the Nebuchadnezzar statue. But Herodotus, who was an ancient Greek historian, writes about the fall of Babylon, and he writes it almost identically to what is recorded in the book of Daniel. It matches almost word for word. You know, that's the one document that they choose to say that is not legitimate from Herodotus because it matches too close to the biblical account. Every other document he wrote, they will take it as gospel truth, except for that one, because it matches the Bible. Then we have Nebuchadnezzar. The Bible tells how long Nebuchadnezzar ruled. It says that his sons and his sons' sons, and we know from history that him and his sons and his sons' sons, Belshazzar was his grandson. It was one of his daughter's children. And Nabonidus was his son-in-law, and he was actually at Haran. And where else do we see Haran in the Bible? Abraham. He went to Haran, to the Temple of Sin, appropriate name for a pagan temple. He went to the temple of sin, and he was there because the people in Babylon didn't like him very much. And so he was letting his son co-rule in Babylon. That's why when Belshazzar is up there, he says, I'll make you third in the kingdom. Why would he make somebody third in the kingdom?
There's already 2 rulers.
Because he was the second. He couldn't make him second in the kingdom because he was already second. Right? And then we have exactly how long these kings ruled. So we know for a fact that Nebuchadnezzar, his dates of 606 are immovable. You cannot move 606, you cannot move 457 BC, you cannot move 31 AD. A lot of people try to move some dates up here. Not good. All right, we can use Nebuchadnezzar to date Josiah. What do we know about Josiah in the Bible? Who was Josiah? He was the boy king. We can date him because Jeremiah says, I started preaching in the 13th year of Josiah. I preached for 23 years, and this is now the 4th year of King Jehoiakim, which is also the 1st year of King Nebuchadnezzar. So Jeremiah lines up not only the Jewish kings, he aligns them to the Babylonian kings. So we have a perfect match. We know exactly how they were counting. And we can take a look. Voila! So now we can get back all the way to 629 BC. Accurate date. All right. Destruction of Jerusalem is going to have to wait. It's break time again. So just bear with me if we seem to be moving extremely fast. All right, Jerusalem. We've established that 457 BC, we followed all the kings to get to 606. We have what's called the Nebuchadnezzar or the Jerusalem Chronicle. What's interesting about the Jerusalem Chronicle is that it details the capture of Jerusalem. And then we have another document called the Ration Tablet. And this documents the king, Jehoiachin, the rations that he was provided from King Nebuchadnezzar. Each month he was given, or each quarter he was given a certain amount of rations, not only for him, but then it lists how many sons he had and the rations that they were given. And this all matches what we have in the Bible. So this is a Babylonian record of an Israelite king, otherwise known as a Judah king, because at this point, Israel and Judah, the actual official Israelite nation, has been long gone at this point. So you can start using Israelite interchangeably again. Some people do, some people don't. I tend to do that because they're all descendants of Jacob. All right, so clues in Ezekiel's vision. So we know where we're at as far as Nebuchadnezzar in 606. We need to get back further if we want to establish biblical chronology. So when we're looking at Ezekiel 1 and 2, it says that Ezekiel is given the vision. And this is the first 7 chapters of Ezekiel. He is 30 years old. He is receiving this vision during the 5th year of Jehoiachin's captivity. Okay? So Jehoiachin has been captive for 5 years. If you turn to 2 Kings 24:12, Jehoiachin only ruled for 3 months. And he was taken captive by King Nebuchadnezzar when Nebuchadnezzar was in the 8th year of his rule. So then we look and we see that the temple was burned in the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar. So this is where we're going to do a little bit of math. So Nebuchadnezzar, according to the scale that the Jews used, the very first day you became king, congratulations, you ruled for a year. Anything that happens during that first year is considered your first year of rule. So Nebuchadnezzar, first year of his rule. Jews calculated it from the co-rule. Babylonians didn't do code rules as far as calculating how long you were king. Babylonians start when daddy dies, 604. So when you're looking at Daniel and you're looking at Jeremiah, Jeremiah is writing King Nebuchadnezzar's timeline from the Jewish viewpoint. Daniel is writing Nebuchadnezzar's timeline from when King Nebuchadnezzar had his dream from the Babylonian viewpoint. So when you can take that into account, all of a sudden people say, oh, there's a discrepancy there. When you take into account Jeremiah writing from the Jewish viewpoint, Daniel writing from the Babylonian viewpoint, all of a sudden the accounts match perfectly. So if the 5th year of Jehoiachin's captivity, which was the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar, that means that Jehoiachin was taken captive in 599. From there, we go forward 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. So Ezekiel is being given this vision in the year 594 in the 13th year of Nebuchadnezzar. Everybody understand that so far? So we used Jehoiachin and Nebuchadnezzar to tell us the year that Ezekiel is being given the vision of the first 7 chapters of the book of Ezekiel. In chapter 4, Ezekiel is told to lie on his side for a certain number of days to represent the one kingdom, lie on his side for the other days to represent a certain day in the kingdom. When you're looking at that, we're also looking at when the temple was destroyed in relation to Ezekiel. The 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, starting at the first year in 606, the Bible says it was burned in the 19th year, according to Jeremiah 52 and 2 Kings 25. 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, 588 BC. Not the 586 that you will see in almost every document known to man right now. It's in all of the stuff that, according to our timeline from the Bible, from using 457, from using the original writings of the church fathers, and how we figured out prophecy and the dating the kings, using the chronologies not only from the Jews, but from the Babylonians and the Persians and the Medes, we know Nebuchadnezzar was 606. Can't move that date. So if we want to believe the Bible says temple was burned in what year? The 19th year. 19th year is 588. Not 587, not 586. You can't change that date. 606, 588, 457 BC, 31 AD. These are all linked. You cannot change one without changing the other. If you change one, you must also shift the other one to the same direction, which makes prophecy what? Fall apart. This is the only way that prophecy sticks together and works perfectly. It also gives us an idea of how long the temple stood, because it is believed that the 390 years that Ezekiel is talking about is how long it was since King Solomon had started building the temple. It had been 390 years. That aligns up. If you go back here and you're looking at the books of Kings and Chronicles and you're lining all the kings up, it had been approximately just under 400 years. Looking at Ezekiel, it was 390 in the year 494. If you add 6 more years to when the temple was destroyed, that means that the temple stood approximately 396 years. So if we use an estimated 396, we can then go back a little further and we can say, okay, 396 for the approximate time that the temple stood. It could have been a little more, could have been a little less, but based on what we know of Ezekiel, 396 is a good judge. 1 Kings 6:1 says it had been 480 years and 1 month and X amount of days since the Exodus. So then, okay, we can go back further from that, And then when we look at Exodus 12 and Galatians 3, it says that from the Exodus to when the covenant was given to Abraham was 430 years. So now we can go back through and we can say, oh, if the temple was destroyed in 588, temple stood for about 396 years. That means that the temple was started in 984. Most places say the temple was started in 966. About 20 years off. Then we can go back another 480 years. We get an Exodus date, 1464. Most things say that the Exodus occurred in 1446. Then we can go back another 430 years to when Abraham is given the covenant in Haran and said, okay, obey my word and go. And Abraham says, okay, I will take you up on that agreement and I will go. So that gives us a date of Abraham of 1894 BC, when Abraham is 75 years old. From there, you can actually go back and we can figure out that it was 2,083 years from when Adam was created to when Abraham was 75 years old. So you can go back and you can place estimated, remember this is estimated, not exact, but estimated creation occurred sometime around 3977, flood occurred sometime around 2321. Why would this be important to know? Why would any of this be important to know? Okay. Do you know what the estimated date for the pyramids is?
No, in years.
Some people say 2500 BC. Sometime around here. Would that be a viable date?
No.
No. If somebody told you, oh, the Sumerian civilization, they go date all the way back to 36 BC. Would the Sumerian civilization date back and have dwellings in 36 BC?
No.
It's not even close. So even if these dates are off, 20 years, it gives us a general idea on what would be biblically accurate dates. So we could go through and we can say that approximately the Battle of Jericho occurred in 1424, that David and Goliath occurred in the year 1034, somewhere around the year 1000. We can know when Joseph was sold approximately, or when Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. We can also look through, and this is just a picture of, similar to what we have here, of how long each of the patriarchs lived and what the crossovers were. So now what? We've established the timeline, and this is where we're going to go really, really fast. All right. Bible says that Hebron, this is a city that Abraham went to, is 7 years older than the city of Zon in Egypt. Bible says that in Numbers 13:22. So the place where Abraham went after he left Egypt is 7 years older than the city of Zon in Egypt. And we know approximately when Abraham was in the city of Zon, the city of Hebron. We know that it's somewhere around 1894. So we're going to say, Ishmael's born in 1883. We know for a fact that Abraham is in the land of Canaan when Ishmael's born. So we're going to play it safe, and we are going to say that absolutely latest that the city of Hebron was built was in 1884 BC. The year before Ishmael was born. And that would then make Zon, or the city of Tanis, built before 1877 BC. Do you know when archaeologists say that the city is built? They say, oh, we found the oldest city in ancient Egypt, and isn't this wonderful? They give it the date of 1200s BC. When we know from the Bible that the city is actually much older than that. It's actually built sometime around the 1800s BC. So it helped us prove that the city is actually much, much older than what the archaeologists are saying. So archaeologists sometimes say something's older, sometimes they say it's younger. The Bible helps us put it in perspective. And this is just pictures of the city of Zon, giant statues there. in the ancient ruins. Then there's the 400 and 430-year prophecy, which we do not have time to go into today. But this also tells us how many years do you think that they spent in, let me go back. They spent 215 years in Egypt total. Because prophecy did not begin when they went into Egypt. It began when Abraham was given the covenant. The 430 years began when Abraham was given the covenant at age 75. So halfway through that time span was actually when Jacob went into Egypt. And in total, from the time that Jacob went in to Moses led them out, was only 215 years. Not 400, not 430. So when they say, oh, it's impossible because, you know, it says in the fourth generation and they would have to be 100 years old.
Right.
In 215 years, 4 generations, when they're living, you know, to be 150, is nothing. We know how old the certain ones were. Joseph. We know when Joseph was approximately born. We also know that there's a guy named Imhotep in Egypt who perfectly matches the story of Joseph. 7-year famine, died at 110 years old. Mother was, you know, the daughter of a person that was into sheep, second in command to Pharaoh. Everything. There's so many things that match. We know that Joseph had the dream years of 1688 to 1675, and he ruled between 1688 and 1608. They found the famine stela. The story is described on this famine stela. It names the pharaoh as the Pharaoh Djoser. Sound familiar? Pharaoh Djoser. It has a D in front of it, but it's pronounced Djoser. And it describes a 7-year famine where Imhotep is sought by the king and has his dream and says, I know how to save the people. And built a grain storage complex. Now, what caused the famine? Drought. Most people assume that's because the Nile didn't flood. Okay? Well, here's the Nile River. Which direction does the Nile River flow? Does it flow this way, south, or does it flow north? It flows north. Would the Nile not flooding affect the land of Canaan at all? No. It wouldn't affect that at all. So we're looking at an event that not only affected Egypt, but affected Canaan and affected the other lands as well, based on what the Bible said. And there we go. What do we know about volcanoes? This ties it back into our discussion earlier. There is a volcano called the Minoan eruption, otherwise known as Santorini or the island of Thera, in the middle of the Mediterranean, that exploded in the 1600s BC. They don't know exactly when. They said sometime in the 1600s. Joseph, based on our biblical dating, we figured out when Joseph was alive, 1718 to 1608. So all throughout the 1600s, Joseph was living in Egypt. So it is very possible, just like when the Mount Tambora blew up in 1815 and caused a worldwide famine, and the year without summer, the Santorini, when it blew up, would have been much, much worse and could have very easily led to a 7-year famine. Not discounting that God could send the famine and God had the 7 good years. Not discounting any of that, but God also uses nature sometimes, as seen in the flood, to work his purposes. So we have an example of God using nature to work his purposes, and we're seeing an event in that area that would have affected the entire world during that time frame, which could account for what we're seeing with Joseph. This is the island now. That big circle is where the island used to be.
Yep.
Before the volcano went kablooey. Also, very last time, there was only 41 years between Levi's death and Moses' birth. And we're told in the Bible that all of Joseph's siblings had died before the Pharaoh put them into slavery. So we know that slavery existed by the time that Moses was born. So in the 41 years between Levi's death and Moses' birth, slavery began for the Israelites. So they actually weren't in slavery at Moses' birth for longer than like 40 years. With Moses' 80 years, in total, we're talking 120. All right, we can use this to figure out who built the pyramids. Djoser is Joseph, or the Pharaoh of Joseph, Imhotep. Westcar Papyrus tells us that the person that was in charge of building the pyramids, Joseph already existed at this point and was considered a wise ruler. So the pyramids were built after Joseph, but before Moses, based on the Egyptian records. So I'm always asked, who built the pyramids? Well, I don't know who built them, if they were built with Hebrew labor, but they suddenly appeared sometime after Joseph and before the Exodus. So draw your own conclusions on that. All right, very last thing, Hammurabi. Hammurabi, this is tying it back to Babylon. He is credited as being the official lawgiver because the laws that he wrote are very similar to the Ten Commandments and the laws that Moses was given in Leviticus and in Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Numbers, all of those. The laws are extremely similar. And they say that the Israelites in Babylonian captivity stole the idea of the Code of Hammurabi and took it and made it their own. This is the generally believed idea for historical scholars. Well, let's look at Hammurabi. The dates that they attribute to Hammurabi are between 1810 and 1750 BC. So let's go back and let's take a look. He's, of course, in the Babylonian and Assyrian area. Wrote, it was a 7-foot tall stela, written in tiny letters that looks like a finger, given a set of laws by the god, that's the fingernail at the top there, perfectly mimics the story of the Ten Commandments. That's why they said, oh, Moses, they stole the idea and attributed it to Moses. But when we look through, they were unchangeable. You couldn't change it. Once it was law, it was law. You see that in the Bible. They say the Code of Hammurabi was established in 1754 BC. Moses didn't occur until 1464, and they attribute him at a later date. So therefore, Moses stole the idea. Catch. Genesis 26:5 says that Abraham kept the commandments. All we have to do is prove that Abraham was alive before Hammurabi. So now we go back to our timeline, and we look at our dates for Abraham. Abraham existed at the same time as Hammurabi, but Hammurabi was only 16 years old when Abraham died. Abraham is listed as keeping the commandments long before Hammurabi was ever born. Abraham is not going to be listening to, a 16-year-old kid on his deathbed. So by establishing a timeline, we also establish the law and when God gave the law, and we know for a fact that it was established before Hammurabi and the Israelites did not steal it. It was something that was universally known and universally recognized as a good idea. Don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, honor your parents. These are generally good ideas, don't you think? So why not? If you're a smart, wise ruler, you would make sense of those. All right, that is all we have time for tonight. I apologize if we went a little fast. Dear Lord, thank you for allowing us to be able to finish tonight, and hopefully people will have learned something, at least one thing new that they didn't know before, and be ready to go and open your word and study out these truths for themselves and dig deeper into what your prophecies have given us to understand them a little better, to be ready for your soon coming. Please be with us tonight as we go home and guide us back here safely tomorrow. Amen.